Can people hear me?
Hi,
Yes,
John.
we can hear you, John. Everyone's just being
Hi.
very, like, we're very quiet. How are you all?
Oh, well, let's get underway.
Yeah,
Nice to see
okay.
everyone. John, over to you.
Yeah. Now, do we have some new people here? I'll bet.
Well, I know everyone, but
Right.
Albert doesn't often join our meetings, so
All right. Okay.
I'd be.
Yeah, I'm happy to introduce
Good.
myself to anyone who
Yeah,
doesn't know
that'd
me
be
already.
nice. Yeah. Sorry.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm Albert Bates. I'm author of a number of related to climate change. I'm living here in Eco Village at the farm in Summertown, Tennessee, where I've been since 1972, and a former environmental attorney, one of the co-founders of the Global Eco Village Network. I've been to a number of COPs going back to the start of the whole UNFCCC process. I was head of delegation for the Global Eco Village Network at the Paris Climate Conference, and I was also author of the Paris Agreement, the book that came out in December of that year. So I'm familiar with the general themes of what you've been talking about here. Most of my work these days is involving biochar, and I'm currently hard at work to try to pave the first road surface in North America using biochar as a substitute for asphalt. That's my work of the moment. But I'm happy to contribute in any way I can. Nice to meet y'all.
Yeah, that's
Right.
awesome, Albert. Albert, he sent a note to our PRAG discussion on the NGO open letter against geoengineering that went to COP28 and prompted quite extensive conversation on our PRAG email list. Thank you very much for that, Albert. And
Well, anyhow, yeah, nice to see you. Yeah. Okay. I rather left the agenda open, and I've mentioned a number of topics in emails. The thing that seems to have changed politically is that we've got a head of the UN who has said that we're already in the era of global boiling, as he's put it, and it is terrifying. So basically, he's saying that the implication is very strong that the IPCC have failed because their duty, what they were intending to do, was to avoid dangerous climate change. And all their reports that I've read, I've done a search on danger, and the only reference to danger in the reports is avoiding dangerous climate change. There's never any danger anywhere else. So one wonders why danger is underplayed by IPCC, and there are various theories about that. One is that the IPCC has been subverted or taken over by the fossil fuel industry interests and governments who support the fossil fuel industry. And we had a good paper from Kyle Kimball on that idea, which I think that there must be an element of truth in what he says, even if it's not very much the truth. But there's a general fear of and that's almost pervasive. It's certainly true in the IPCC. One of the lead authors has now become the lead scientist of the IPCC. The leader of the COP is an ex-oil executive, which supports Kyle's theory that's kind of taken over by fossil fuel interests. And they want the fossil fuel industry just wants to promote the status quo, and anything like SRM is just disruption for them. But within the IPCC, the subject of SRM came up, and the scientists in the group, I think it was Working Group 3, it was headed by the new man, head of, I can't remember what his name is, Skier or something like that.
Jim Ski. His name is Jim
Ski, yeah.
He's at Imperial College.
Yeah. Said that they had such distaste for geoengineering. I thought that was a wonderful word, distaste. I mean, what I read from that is that they're dead scared of geoengineering. And they certainly just scared of being accused of promoting geoengineering, because I think one of the things that they really fear is that if they were seen to be promoting it and then it happened and then it went wrong, they would get blamed. And they kind of argue then that geoengineering will never happen because nobody will dare to press the button, so to speak, without a huge amount of governance, and governance is going to be pretty impossible. So SRM is out, so we have to buckle down and reduce emissions and that kind of thing. It's a cop-out. And somehow this has got to be faced down, or to use the Buckminster Fuller idea, you develop an alternative model and leave the old model to wither away. But I'm not sure that's an appropriate strategy for us. I think we just got to try and get into somebody who's going to listen to us and who's brave enough to say that this situation is stupid and we should be getting on with geoengineering, preparing to deploy, looking at all the downsides, try to find ways which would make the deployment manageable and effective and quick and not too expensive. My own research suggests that stratospheric aerosol is injection, but let's not go into that. Let's. I've spoken enough. I'd like to have some comment. Robert, were you wanting to speak?
Well, I was just going to ask you. I'm just going to comment really about your introduction. I think you're really preaching to the converted here. It would be helpful to open up the floor. I was just concerned that we might spend an hour listening to you, and as interesting as it would be, there are probably better ways of spending our time.
Well, very good that if people do agree with me.
I don't think anybody here is going to argue particularly about your speculations that you just been referring to, but I don't think that's what we're here to discuss tonight.
Yeah,
I'll just follow up, John. So we've got
okay.
Rebecca and Jonathan and myself have hands raised. So let's and then Herb. So let's hear from each of us in order. So Rebecca.
Yes, I actually think it is good that John raised that, Robert, because it's if we spend 10 or so minutes or however long we want to on our storyline, then it's time well spent, because the emails have been absolutely going wild lately with every thread seems to have like times 100 of the number of emails replies on it, and it's all about this type of thing. So I think if we spend time, as lovely Clive likes to get us to do, to sit down and talk, that is good. But anyway, I do agree with you. My main thing I agree with you in this sense, Robert, Chris, and that is that what Bucky Fuller said is the same as what any practical person says, which is unless you've got something, you can't fix it or change it or amend it. But what the word model there, John, the way you said it, John Nissen I'm speaking to, the way you said it, you made it sound like we have to get from here to here in one leap. And that is not what a new model means in terms of, if you think about, I'm just going to mention some names and it doesn't matter if you don't know them, but Schumpeter, an economic theorist, wrote about change and how it happens in waves like this. And many people have said that. And all I'm really saying is that my opinion is once we get even one planetary cooling technique going at the test level, then the snowball is going to roll down the hill, and it's going to, overnight, we're going to be in a one of those sudden changes, the theory of science, or I've forgotten what that chap's name was. But my example, Robert, Chris, could you please put your hand up if you want to speak? But well, I cannot hear you unless you speak clearly, and you're just muting yourself. That's okay. What I wanted to say was the example that I gave many months ago, going back to Ramadan this year, which was in April. So this is now about how do we get the social change and the support for any kind of, I say let's just start with one planetary cooling technology. I have a friend called Fahima, who is a Malaysian Indigenous woman who's been living here in Sydney for a long time. She studied architecture and she's a professional architect. She's now employed full-time by Move Beyond Coal. And Move Beyond Coal, I'll just say that again slowly. So when I know Fahima in several different contexts, including I'm in a book group with her and we're personal friends. So anyway, one night, myself and a few other people went out to this thing called the Lakemba Night Markets, which is a multicultural Muslim festival where you go and buy food at after dark. And we actually had a Hindu and Christian and multi-faith ceremony there that night, all about, the moon and peace and climate and all of that sort of thing. Anyway, afterwards, I was explaining to Fahima about MCB, and I mentioned Stephen in Edinburgh because it makes it more real if there's an actual person there. And I mentioned all sorts of things. And she just absolutely fell in love with the idea and said, when I said I could help her get some money to go to a conference in Fiji, I think it was, or no, I'm sorry, it was Hawaii. She said, oh no, Rebecca, don't look for that money because, you need to be raising £2 million for MCB. And just to cap off this story, she is now an advocate for MCB. I have not gone to any Move Beyond Coal meetings because I've been tired. I've been invited to a number of dinners over there, but I thought I've got to have my ducks lined up before I go. Otherwise, I can go and have an introductory chat like I did with Fahima that particular night. But the last thing I'll say is that when I was in the book group with Fahima about 2-3 weeks after that, when we were sitting quietly and we were discussing epistemology and how does anyone know anything? And I said, well, in fact, here's a good example because I've told Fahima 2-3 weeks ago about MCB and she really likes it. But I said, now, how do I know anything about it? I don't know necessarily very much, even though I'm in a couple of Google groups about it. But I said, I'm working to support Stephen and the others on actually coming back to my first thing, actually develop the technology ready for testing. And I said, Fahima, presumably you sort of think it's somewhat of a credible idea because it's me who told you. Anyway, I'm really saying that I think if we can just get one technology up and running in terms of even field testing, then we will be, the technological and social change snowball, both of those different things will start to roll down the hill, popular opinion will change, and we will start having a small impact on the climate. Now, I know there's a lot of assumptions in what I've said about whether MCB is the right one, or we could have 2 or 3 going at once, but I just say that getting from state A to state B is not like switching on the light switch.
Thanks, Rebecca. We've got a bit of an agenda from John, which I've put into the chat. So starting with dangerous climate change, and then John has also suggested that we talk about stratospheric aerosol injection, estimating SO2 cooling, and wildfires. And I'm happy for us to have those points on the agenda. Rebecca's also opened this potential snowball concept of marine cloud brightening as an initiating technology. And of course, I've had a bit of an email conversation with Doug Grant about what the process for exploring marine cloud brightening might be. So I'm very happy to come back to that. But I propose we just continue to take people in the order that they've put their hands up, and anyone's welcome to come back and comment on any of those issues. Thanks. So Jonathan, next.
Thanks. Yeah, Albert, I think you mentioned that you were involved as a lawyer or in the legal aspects of some part of climate change. But I think that one way to look at the word dangerous is the definition I put into the chat, where if we can get a large group of lawsuits in different countries or different parts of the same country to start to bring the idea of negligence to the government or a particular company, anybody can be the target really, and get the idea of negligence, that I think that might be what they're hinting at in the official documents where they say dangerous. I think that would be dangerous to the finances of the government due to lawsuits for their negligence. I think that would be a good way to interpret it, and it could be a good branch of activity for us. Is that something you?
I don't know if you're familiar. I don't know if you're familiar with the Our Children's Trust, but this is a series of class actions that currently are active in different countries. Some of them are progressing, others are being thwarted, but it's an ongoing effort by a group of lawyers and young people to charge the government in that particular location with essentially negligence in not protecting the essential natural rights of those younger people. Some of those suits have been going on now for long enough that the young people are no longer young people, but they still remain as plaintiffs. And that is being pursued in an organized way, raising lots of money and pursuing this in many jurisdictions. So yes, there is potential for that.
The trouble with that work is that it presumes that the solution to the dangerous negligence of government and industry on climate change is to cut emissions, and the theme that's been throughout our discussions is that albedo enhancement has to become central to the conversation, and so the ability to mitigate dangerous climate change requires urgent albedo enhancement, and the connection of that to cutting emissions has been very much up for debate. So Herb.
I think it was either Robert or Tulip or Robert Chris that raised this point when I gave my talk here on biochar. But there is an issue that's often brought up in biochar. world over albedo enhancement. And that's some of the reason that we've slowed down our process of pouring this biochar asphalt substitute until we've worked out a formula for mineralization where we could actually reduce the albedo of new hard surfaces. And we can actually have something like the Cliffs of Dover effect using diatomaceous earth or other fossiliferous clays to increase the to change the lightness, make it lighter in color and more reflective in certain wavelengths than black asphalt. And I just wanted to mention that because I hadn't mentioned that when I spoke of biochar earlier.
It's an awesome technology, Albert, and I think that making roads from carbon has got gigaton scale. But let's come back to that later. And, we'll just take people in order. Herb.
Thanks, Robert. Some of you, I'm sure maybe all of you have heard me say this or read what I've written recently, but I can't emphasize it enough. I mean, we have a situation now, I mean, now meaning literally right now, because of the worldwide fear that any climate aware person is experiencing, looking at the charts and the numbers, and the fact that it's likely, in fact, let's hope that the things settle down by September or October, and then we'll have back to our usual complacency, at least in the Northern Hemisphere. It shifts, I realize, for our Australian colleagues, it's the opposite to some degree. But I can't urge you all enough to strike while the iron is literally hot right now. And as I've said and written a bit, my own, in addition to the work I do with HPAC, et cetera, I find Twitter, even though it's being destroyed by Elon Musk, is still enough, has enough functionality and enough people on it that a concerted effort to attempt to clear away some of the egregious ignorance and misconceptions that are out there about the climate crisis could pay enormous dividends. I mean, I'll just mention a couple of them. Again, I've said this before, but what my approach is not to argue about how likely we are to get to 1 point or to get to net zero, but to concede that, let's say we are able to get to net zero by mid-century, is extremely unlikely as that is, that the current science, which is not disputed greatly except by people who think it underestimates climate, is that we'll have elevated temperatures for decades after that. We'll have continuing sea level rise. We'll have continuing ecosystem collapse. I mean, why would the Amazon all of a sudden stop becoming a source instead of a sink when we reach net zero at 2 degrees higher than we are today, or 1 degree higher? And when I point this out on Twitter, and almost no climate scientists until very recently are acknowledging that. They hide that. At least that seems to be the case, whether it's conscious or unconscious. I don't know what's in their minds. Ed Hawkins, and there was another climate scientist I forgot just a day or two ago, who finally acknowledged that we're still going to have hell after we reach net zero. And when people understand that, and people see what's happening now, it begins to create the sort of social proof that emission reductions alone are dramatically insufficient, laughably, except there's nothing funny about it, inadequate to avoid what I call planetary dystopia. That's the term I use because it's somewhat subjective, but it doesn't use a word like collapse, which people argue against and so forth. And I've had some success lately. I've gotten, or I don't know how much influence I personally had, but I think I had some influence in getting the woman who is the executive director of the Climate Emergency Fund that gives out millions of dollars a year for activism to finally say a week or so, or a few days ago, that maybe we need to consider cooling. Same thing with Roger Hallam, who's probably the leading Extinction Rebellion or former Extinction Rebellion and best known activist in the UK. And just this morning, I had an interesting dialogue on Twitter with the guy who is the European environment editor for and writer rather for The Guardian, who was not aware, seemingly from the discussion, that tipping points can be activated. If you look at the Lenton paper, at 1.5 degrees C. So anyway, all that is a long, maybe too long a way of saying that I would really like to encourage all you to do in addition to everything else you're doing, take an hour a week or so and get on social media. And I have to give Doug a real shout out here. You do a great job, Doug. You've been at it probably longer than I have on Facebook and so forth, and are very creative in your efforts. And again, I think this is an incredible opportunity to leverage strategic use of certain messages with, particular people, strategically selected people, to turn some minds around. And that's obviously not in lieu of anything else we're doing or you're all doing, but it's something that I think could be done fairly easily. And if you're not, able or willing to do it, talk to one of your friends or colleagues or family members. I'm no expert on social media, but I'd be happy to, sit down, quote unquote, with any of you or your friends or colleagues to, explore the best way to do that. So that's my pitch for today.
Thanks, Herb. John.
Excellent, Herb. Yeah, we do have to kind of try and get the message across to people who might be able to kind of gather momentum behind the need for cooling intervention. I've always focused on the Arctic, but I mean, general cooling is required, and that's perhaps more obvious than cooling of the Arctic. So I don't want to get one momentum in the way of the other. Let's sort of push along at the same time.
If you do general cooling, you will cool the Arctic.
Yeah, you may well be right.
I am right. That all the heat that's going to the Arctic has come from somewhere warmer. If you cool that, it won't get to the Arctic.
Yeah, well, you did quote a paper that showed some heating in the Arctic. But it was an assemblage of models, and some of the models said there was no cooling in the Arctic. So, one just doesn't know what the assumptions are. I think that's an open question, and I would welcome very much if we could do global cooling with MCB, and it would help to refreeze the Arctic.
It is the most elementary physics and thermodynamics that heat goes from hot places to cold places. And if you reduce the source of the heat, it won't be able to get to the cold places. This is not difficult physics.
Yeah. Okay, but so supposing you reduce global temperature by 2 degrees, you actually need to reduce the Arctic by about 4 times that.
I think if the Arctic is heating at 4 times other places, it might also cool if you cool the other places by a factor of 4.
Well, there's an amplification mechanism in the Arctic, and once we got the cooling going, and then the positive feedback will work for us. But the most likely thing to be successful from the physics is the stratospheric aerosol injection.
Only if you can be quite sure that it doesn't get there in the winter. If it does get there in the winter, it'll work in the wrong direction.
I've explained many times that the idea of the Brewer-Dobson should take the stratospheric aerosol out after.
We're currently on the dangerous heating agenda point, and John has suggested SAI, and we've also want to talk about MCB. So let's just.
I want to go back.
I want to go SAI and MCB, and just have just finish off on the dangerous heating work, John.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to what Albert was saying. Could we could we introduce the idea that for the children's sake, we actually need some cooling, and the the legal situation, negligence is negligence of cooling. That's what they've neglected to do. They've completely ignored and neglected the possibility of cooling the planet. And this is governments. You could apply this to governments or the IPCC. But so I don't know who you'd make as the culprit. But do you think that could fly? Do you think the possibility of doing that, Albert?
Well, I wouldn't venture to guess exactly how you would accomplish that. It's, our Children's Trust is actually quite a good effort. They've spent a lot of time and effort to seek out the right jurisdictions and to have a whole entire staff of attorneys ready to prepare briefs. They've been dismissed, had their complaints adjudicated by legislators who made changes to the laws. So in some jurisdictions, they've succeeded along separate routes, but they continue to persist and continue to file new cases in jurisdictions where it seems most promising. Their defendants are governments themselves, which are deemed to have a constitutional mandate to protect future people. And so it's the young people that are having the greatest standing in that regard, that their lives are most adversely affected. And so far, they've held up quite well in the science end, and they've mainly been thwarted on minor jurisdictional issues and legal nuances that have been raised to try to prevent them from getting adjudicated.
But could you change the negligence charge from emissions reduction, failure to reduce emissions, to failure to apply something which would actually have the effect of cooling the planet?
Well, it's not just emissions reductions. And in some cases, in some of these litigations, they're actually seeking more affirmative action by governments to step in and do something to protect them. Not necessarily specifying what that something is, but it's not entirely emissions reductions. And notice also, they're not making the fossil fuel companies or any other perpetrators their targets. They're actually going after governments on an affirmative duty to protect their citizens.
All right. Do you mind if I move on? I had a further comment on the dangerous heating issue, and I'm just going to share this chart that I made from the data produced by Climate Action Tracker, and it's what I find interesting in this is that in terms of the ability of the IPCC vision to address dangerous heating, that what they've said is that it's these three lines of emission reduction that are needed in order to, as you can see, to cut emissions globally in half by 2030. And but the analysis by Climate Action Tracker says that that this orange line is a highly optimistic line, which would still by 2030 still have close to 50 gigatons of CO2 equivalent. And really the most likely path is that we'll continue along this blue line until we reach some sort of crisis and collapse, and then there'll be some sudden fall due to a collapse of economic activity and war and just.
Figure out this graph. I'm sorry, I make charts and infographics and I couldn't figure this out. This is Jonathan. What is the definition of the word high and low in the
Okay,
description?
so I've given the link here to Climate Action Tracker. Policies and actions. So if the current actions that are currently in place by all the countries of the earth, there are there's a range of outcomes that could result from policies and actions, between a high result of still 45, 48 by 2100, and possibly a fall to 30 gigatons. And then similarly, pledges and targets, which, as I've commented, are really more spin and lies than anything real, range between the purple and the blue, that could cut down to around 10 gigatons if implemented, and but still very far from 1.5 compliant. So what I'm essentially illustrating in terms of the dangerous warming question is that the likelihood of shifting to this carbon trajectory is really not there, and so this is a way of saying that in order to achieve the 1.5 compatible approach, that we do absolutely need direct cooling technology. So yeah, I just wanted to share that, and go back to the questions that we had on the agenda. Now, the next things that John had suggested we talk about were stratospheric aerosol injection and estimating SO2 cooling. And if other people have, so what I suggest is we spend a short amount of time on, if we can combine those two points, and then talk about wildfires, and then finish up with a discussion around marine cloud brightening. So happy to have any comments on whether that's an appropriate path forward, but otherwise I'll just pass to. So, John, listen.
Robert, excuse me, I'm just turning on my thing for a moment so that people can hear a lovely butcher bird outside my window. It's got a certain song, and I just thought introducing a bit of nature would be nice. But if I'm making too much noise, I'll mute myself again.
Yeah, can't hear the bird. Usually Zoom,
it's not singing right now.
It screens out background sounds. But yeah, back to John.
Yeah, it's we might have an owl here, but a tawny owl sometimes will sing at this time of night. Yes, back to stratospheric aerosol injection. There's a huge fear of it, and I think we need to try and break through that fear. You know, when I discussed it with people, and I say, you know, it's just what volcanoes do, and they put some SO2 into the troposphere and it causes cooling, and they put some, the larger volcanoes put it into the stratosphere, and it's very effective at cooling. The trouble is that you want to limit the lifetime, because you don't want to go into the Arctic in the winter, as Stephen has said. So you can inject it at higher latitude where so that the aerosol is carried towards directly towards the pole, rather than shooting up very high and then landing on top of the pole. There have been a huge number of papers, scientific papers, written against stratospheric aerosol injection. None of them very at all convincing, in my opinion. Well, just kind of two or three remaining problems. There's something that Tao came up with, a reduction in productivity underneath, or too much or too little ultraviolet. I'm not sure which. And the problem that Stephen mentioned, which is winter warming. Those are the two that seem to hold water, and the winter thing can be avoided. And the studies done so far about the ozone hole seem to suggest that it's a kind of manageable problem. It will reduce the speed at which the ozone hole recovers. Hopefully, not actually make it worse. And it has huge benefits very quickly. So it starts cooling straight away. It produces a uniform cooling around the planet, so it doesn't disrupt anything. So you can't, when you apply it, you can't be blamed for shifting a weather system, as you might do with an adverse effect. So the governance issue is not really a problem, because anybody could do it and it would have the same effect. The Chinese could do it. I remember Ken Caldeira saying, well, what's supposing that China did it alone? Well, fair enough. You'd still get the good effect. And he just didn't accept that that stratospheric aerosol could be a very simple method.
John, if I can jump in, I completely agree with you, and I think it's a really strange conundrum as to why there is this emotional hostility emotional political hostility, and it's remarkable how uninformed the general public are about the science, and I think that we can partly blame the IPCC for that, which is made up of the scientific community, and as you commented earlier, this claim in the IPCC of distaste for geoengineering, it's essentially an emotional repugnance that which seems to be a bit like all sorts of religious taboos that people have had over the years, where the taboo is maintained just by an instinctual revulsion. And so explaining that instinctive psychological mass revulsion for something which is, as you say, apparently a thoroughly necessary, urgent, benign treatment to massively reduce suffering is, I'm sure, will be viewed in years to come as one of the very strange puzzles. It's a bit like, why did the USA support slavery for so long? It's why did the Germans kill 6 million Jews? It's these sorts of mysteries about human psychology. That's why it is, and so the question that arises is in terms of the political tactics, what is a way of breaking through that issue? And I'm sure that a part of the revulsion is the emotional connection that people draw between sulfur and brimstone, and the idea that it's something from the devil. So you've got these sorts of crazy mythological tropes that influence mass delusion, and several, and as Rebecca alluded earlier, by comparison, sea salt is something that people are familiar with, and that's the idea of just essentially grinding up salt to a submicron scale and adding it to clouds is I think something. The question is where can we find an entry technology that can have a significant effect, that can contribute to changing that irrational public hostility. And to my assessment, that's where a starting point with marine cloud brightening makes a lot of sense. And I also would like to see progress towards an international albedo union or international albedo authority that would be responsible for assessing all of these claims that are out there about the science. And as David Keith commented, the scale of investment needed to properly assess all of the geoengineering technologies would, in his estimation, cost around $2 billion to properly test it, and it would save damage worth $10 trillion. So the cost benefit ratio is just quite extraordinary, and 5,000 to 1, and the inability of people in the media to pick up on that as a really big story. Here we've got a solution with immense benefits, and we lack the brains to. We're not smart enough. We're not bright enough to brighten the planet. So these sorts of questions really need to be opened up. So anyway, those are some thoughts. We haven't got anyone else with their hand up, so either back to John or back to you, John.
Yes, the one thought is that the battle that the climate activists are battling with the fossil fuel companies over emissions, and they ought to be fighting for cooling action. They've got the wrong target. Or they should be demanding that the fossil fuel companies do the cooling, apply the cooling technology. Why not demand that they do that? And the fossil fuel companies will look at the cost of doing it, and it will be peanuts for them.
Yeah, very good points, John. And the question of how to break through the brick wall that's in between you and public is a really tough one. I just wanted to welcome Ronald Larson, who's joined us, and great to see you, Ron. And together with Albert, two of the luminaries of the biochar world, it's wonderful to have you both here. And I also wanted to note the comments in the chat. I would characterize them as discussing the zero emission commitment and the ability of emission reduction to achieve cooling. And I particularly note Albert's comment about the Club of Rome paper from Jürgen Randers about the ongoing rising temperature until 2500, and a link to a Nature article on that, irrespective of how fast we cut GHGs. And I think that that's I wasn't aware of that paper. So so thank you for sharing it, Albert. Rebecca.
So I want to say a comment now to sort of cap off what you and Robbie Tulip and John Nissen have both just said. The psychology is what it is, the mass psychology of climate suicide, let's call it, rather than the mass psychology of fascism. We cannot change that by writing anything. And that was an allusion to Wilhelm Reich. I'm sure everybody knows that. But what I'm saying to you, John, is I find it actually quite destructive in terms of trying to get some climate cooling going for you to keep on repeating over and over and over again, SAI, SAI, because forget about the science of it, which is a separate discussion, and I don't want to go into that today at all. I am saying that people are going to die in a ditch rather than have SAI. They would rather let this planet go up in flames, and it's up to people like us to strategize. So I'm now going back onto Wouter van Dieren from the climate, which unfortunately I've been looking on the map, how far is Bath from anywhere, because I'm coming to England in December, and I'm not, in fact, we will be visiting Bath, so we'd love to come and have a cuppa with you and maybe play some cello duets. But moving right along, what I am saying is that we simply cannot afford to allow, sorry, that was Wouter van Dieren's point at the Cambridge workshop, is we must have one unified voice in public. It's fine for us to be sitting here and having these discussions, which are very, very cordial and constructive, because what we're really doing is working out the high level story. But you know, what you are doing, John, in my opinion, my fondest, kindest, warmest opinion is defraying our energies. And like, believe me, behind the scenes, there is a little hands-on team called the MCB and other technologies team, where we're looking for 7 million of funding or whatever the number is. Someone else can say what the number is, but we're just about to walk into some funders and say, can we have this, please? And once we get that going, you know, then that lovely little snowball is going to roll down the hill, and then we can, everyone, all of the naysayers are going to say like, whoops, wow, oh, good idea to cool the planet. And look, MCB's working. I wonder whether we need some SAI as well or something. So I'm saying I don't mind. It's good for us to discuss here, but, you know, I have actually started only really glancing at all the emails, and I read the punchline in the one about thickening the Arctic ice with salty water, which you said, John Nissen, good on you, you said it costs a lot of money, it's untested, and, you know, this is yet another diversion. And then you went back onto SAI, whereas Ye and the others, and even Ronald, who is here now, have been trying to say, John, what you seem to care about is the Arctic, so can you please get off SAI and look at other things? So I'm really saying I don't mind these cordial discussions, but I believe and think that they are taking us on a path of a lot of mental energy going on, the philosophical desktop stuff. And meanwhile, the other little practical bods like myself and whoever else is involved are getting on with getting MCB up and running. So I am saying I'm not annoyed at you, John, but I'm thinking, to be quite honest, in the nicest possible way, you're a bit like a broken record from the 60s on a nice track that's going round and round. So I'm being a bit cheeky.
All right, well, thanks, Rebecca. And so, you know, really, we've got various tactical perspectives, and I think several people have mentioned Buckminster Fuller's suggestion that you know, building something new is more important, and you know, various of us are constructively engaged in building something new. Robert, Chris.
Yeah, I just want to add a kind of a rider to what, or a comment to what Rebecca has just said. I think all these observations about how controversial any form of cooling is are absolutely correct. I mean, wherever you go, whoever you talk to, that isn't in this little bubble, they immediately talk. You talk about cooling the planet, hands go up in horror. And I think that one of the problems is that, exactly as as Rebecca has just said, SAI has become almost synonymous with solar radiation management. And when people hear the word solar radiation management, they're now kind of conditioned to think SAI. And we have to break that link. We have to break that link. And in the conversations that I have with people, one of the things that I endeavor to do is actually to be agnostic at this stage about any of these technologies. You know, one of the things that that Ron Bayman and his colleagues did was put together a great paper that lists almost, I think, 19 different approaches. I'm sure that some of them are a bit crazy, but the point is that there are lots of different ways of skinning this cat. And I think that at this early stage, when talking to the uninitiated, probably the best way of approaching this is to talk about a whole range of possibilities. And what we need to do at this early stage is to explore the territory, not to pursue or to promote any one particular technology, unless, of course, one has got a project that one wants to launch. That's a different thing. But when talking generally about cooling, we should keep it general about cooling and not really major on any one technology, because none of them is yet sufficiently robust and secure and well researched and well understood to be able to say hand on heart, this is the one we should do. So just keep it.
Okay, well, I will put hand on my heart on that respect. And to answer Rebecca's point, when I've explained to ordinary people, friends, about stratospheric aerosol injection and how it's mimicking volcanoes, they understand completely. And they think, you know, why aren't we doing it? And the answer is that, you know, that if you're an activist, you assume that the IPCC is kind of God and giving you correct information, and that the solution to climate change is emissions reduction, and anything like cooling is a distraction, and lets the fossil fuel industry off the hook for that kind of thing. But ordinary people will understand completely and think, you know, why on earth aren't we doing this? And I think if we talk and I think if we do talk to economists face to face and put the case for stratospheric aerosol injection, they will think, you know, this is really sound economics to do it if we can reduce the climate extremes. And of course, crucial to this is the fact that the meandering of jet stream, which causes the weather extremes, is due to the Arctic warming more rapidly and reducing the temperature gradient, which drives the Rossby waves eastward around the planet, which I've explained many times. But that is actually quite crucial to the argument for specifically cooling the Arctic, which is much safer certainly with stratospheric aerosol, much safer than applying it globally. Marine cloud brightening might be appropriate globally if and SAI for the Arctic. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't use other things, because we ought to be pulling out all the stops. And to say that I'm only ever talking about SI is wrong. We produced a report a couple of years ago on all the different ways of cooling the Arctic. A few have been added since then, but we had lots and lots of discussion about sea ice thickening in various ways, and I had my own kind of project idea for that, and so our public statements are, yeah, pull out all the stops, but we mustn't keep quiet about stratospheric aerosol just because it's controversial. because that's the one that's probably easiest to explain to people.
We'll hear from Robert, Chris, and then Rebecca, and I think Stephen may wish to have a comment as well. Robert.
One quick comment, and that is that we should beware of easy generalizations. The ordinary people, John, is not a homogenous group. There are lots of ordinary people that do not share each other's views, and there are different groups of ordinary people. So we should be very wary of making statements like the ones you did, because it isn't that simple.
And it's often the case that if you speak to somebody face to face, then they will be much more sympathetic in their immediate response to you, but then they will think about it and they will come back later with some much more critical comments than they were willing to express when you were speaking to them directly. So I've shared some information about that previously. Rebecca.
So, John, thank you very much again for enunciating your approach, which is very similar, let's say, to the people here, including me, with all the work that I'm doing in the thinking. What I am saying is that I didn't want to get into science with you. I have got a number of scientific objections to SAI, which I'm not going to speak about here today at all. But what I am saying is what Robert said just then, Robert Chris, that and Robert Tulip, with Fahima, I said, it might not be true. And so everyone needs time to think. When they start looking into it, they might find the scientific objections. And then it's another whole thing. So what I'm saying is at the moment, SRM is two things. It might be more than two. It's actually three if you include cirrus cloud thinning, but quite different: stratosphere, troposphere, or boundary of the troposphere and the stratosphere, which is where the MCB proposal is going to work. And I am putting my time in to say to people, yeah, SAI, I've even said this to a very strategic person here in Australia who is a democratic reform person. SAI might work and should be tested, but let's just get going first. And without going into the science, I'm talking about the sequencing. So again, by all means, say whatever you like in your own lounge room and your own small groups that you're in. But I'm glad about today because I think it's helping us to clarify not what should we say in these meetings. These meetings have got to be open discussions, but I'm trying to help us focus our publicly, outwardly facing energy on, thank you, Robert Chris, for saying, that if you've got a proposal, go and get funding for it, because that's what we're right about to do. I predict within a month or 2 months maximum, we're going to have money, whatever. But I'm saying that it's not helpful to ignore all the scientific things, John, when you are advocating SAI or saying it can be done quickly and things like that. Maybe it can, but there's enough scientific objections that we ought to get going with the one that's very nice and safe. Even if you personally think that it isn't going to work very well at scale, I personally think it is going to work very well at scale, but that again is a scientific judgment and it's an assessment that needs to be done. And I don't reckon that either you or I are qualified to do that. But on the workings that I personally have done and the review of the work that Stephen and Alan Gadian and others have shared, I think that MCB does have a very good likelihood of impacting on the climate. But anyway, I don't mind whatever you say in this group because this is a lovely open discussion group.
Look, let's hear from Stephen and then wrap this up with a comment from John. Stephen.
Okay, first question to John is what's the ratio of the Brewer-Dobson velocity to the jet stream velocity?
It's a huge difference.
Yes.
I think it takes perhaps a month northward movement to get to the pole, or it would do if you actually reach the pole. So that's quite a slow velocity, whereas the lateral velocity, the eastward velocity is
it's hundreds of meters.
It's very right. It may be hundreds of miles an hour. Yeah.
Well, now, in most fluid systems, which we'd think about a tidal stream current or something like that, the cross stream velocity is between 10 and 15% of the forward velocity. So the jet stream is going to be stirring up the aerosol, which you hope was all going to be done before the autumn comes. So I don't think that you can suddenly hope that you'll be able to switch off your marine cloud, your stratospheric aerosol at the same speed at which we can turn off the salt in our troposphere. What you do is going to be there with a very slow decay, maybe several years before the last few percent has gone. It's not going to be a sudden square wave switch off. That's the first problem. Second problem I have is that if you have another Pinatubo cooling us down, and you're cooling us down, you're cooling us down more than we want. So we're going to get another repeat of what happened in 1815, when there wasn't any summer and there was dreadful harvest losses. The great thing about marine cloud brightening is that you can choose where you do it and when you do it. And if you don't like what's happening, you can change your mind. But the next time it rains or snows, it's all forgiven. It's that short life of marine cloud brightening is really a very, very attractive feature. I've seen some papers, and I think maybe one or two, which say that it's only capable of doing 1.6 petawatts. I think you've said this, and I've been using a number which was given quite recently by Julia Slingo, who is the head of the Hadley Centre, and she says that our problem at the moment is 1.7 watts per square metre. Okay, and what I did was to multiply 1.7 watts per square metre by the number of square metres in the surface of the Earth. Okay, and the product of those two things is 0.8 of a petawatt. So people would say
0.85, yes. Yeah,
right.
Of course. That's
Okay.
what calculation I'm doing all the time.
For the whole world, all right?
Yeah.
So people say
But
you can only...
we need something less than that, 0.5, to cool the Arctic.
Yeah.
Specifically in the Arctic.
Well, you're saying that Arctic is 0.5 and the whole world is 0.8. What about the Antarctic?
Well, the thing about the Arctic is that there's the amount of albedo loss is not included in that 1.7.
Yes, but people are saying marine cloud brightening isn't enough to do the job. It can only do 1.6 petawatts.
Oh, if you could do that, that'd be fine.
No, they're saying that it's no good because it can only do twice as much as we actually need.
Well, if you can do 1.6, that would be brilliant. But my calculations were that if you try and do the brightening in the Arctic, you're about two orders of magnitude too small. And if you do it at that mid-latitude, you're about one order too small.
If we can,
and those were the calculations that I've been sending you and telling you about.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's really very profitable to discuss them at this meeting.
I think it's extremely
very technical.
It's extremely profitable, and if you could quadruple the nuclei concentration in a small fraction of the Earth, okay, you can actually do 2.5 times 10 to the 15. That's 2.5 petawatts. If you can quadruple the nuclear concentration in a small fraction of the ocean surface. It really is. There's plenty of capability there. Quadrupling it is a big dose. I think we don't want to do more than doubling it, I don't think we need to do more than doubling it.
Okay,
I think
well,
if I can,
What I'm objecting to is people saying, I'm objecting to people saying you're no good.
So could I say
we-
here, hey, John, what I'm going to do is pretend that I'm Robbie and be the chairperson from Sydney. The conversation that has just happened is absolutely marvellous. And I'm not sure what's going to happen in the next fortnight before the next PRAG meeting. However, despite Robbie saying that it's going to cost billions or squillions or whatever, I don't know what your number is from David Keith to work out the climate cooling impacts, there is a thing called a desktop estimation of it, which is what you, Stephen and John were just doing. So whoever has the mental energy could sit down and write up option A and option B of what was just said. And then each other you have just been interrogating each other's assumptions, which is marvelous. So that's why I agree with Stephen. Very good idea to have it at this level, this conversation. And I don't mind if we don't get onto wildfires again, which I've got information from Australia, if that, but I applaud you both for saying that. And whoever has got the time or the energy can help progress this in the next fortnight. So again, thank you to both of you.
I would also
okay. We have Stephen and I have been battling it out for months.
I know you have, and you have never used each other's language.
Stephen has never accepted my thing, and I've never accepted Stephen's. So I've tried giving calculation to other people, and I've tried to check my assumptions with Stephen.
So we're nearly at a breakthrough point now, John.
So
Alan Gadian has agreed with Stephen. So let's just say, can we do more work on this?
It hasn't got us anywhere. So can I move on to the next item on the agenda?
No, I'm still want to talk about this. The numbers that you put into your calculation, you didn't give any references to any of them. They were numbers that you just grabbed out of the air.
I used the assumptions that you had given me, Stephen.
That's not true. I put every reference to the things that I put into my calculations is on that table that I sent you. I will circulate that to the rest of this group. The ones that you put in, you didn't put any references at all.
You did a comparison going back to May with what some figures that I'd given, and you produced a figure on the other side, which you said showed that I was making a mistake on the consistently in the same direction, and you were just comparing apples with oranges. I wasn't. My figures weren't on the same thing that the cloud cover or whatever it was as you gave.
Well, you said
so. You said 18. You said 18% cloud cover in the right-hand column, and I've been using 30% cloud cover.
Yeah, and I sent you a graph of the actual cloud fraction from a paper.
Stephen, I think we'll draw this to a close. Just a sec, Rebecca. I think looking at the follow-up point about estimating SO2 effects, the overall issue is what's the process to get anyone to listen to anything anyone says, and it's about having a competent authority who's able to assess it. Now, at the moment, the official competent authority is the IPCC, and they are not conducting the analysis. There's essentially no money to do the analysis, to verify or check the claims that John Nissen is making, and so there's this basic governance problem of how can we get universities and governments to work together to consider this as a central climate policy question, and it's not one that we're going to solve here, but I think reflecting on it as a problem is just something that's really important. So we'll hear from Rebecca and then Herb, and then I think I'd like to move on. We've just got 15 minutes to go.
So, John, what I would like to say is that I trained as an economist, and this is the sort of thing that we do. We write things down in tables. I've done macro and micro. I've been working for 42 years, and I've done a lot of work on getting your assumptions and ideas, Stephen's assumption and ideas, putting them into a table and comparing them and documenting them. Alan Gadian has also commented on that and has landed on the side of Stephen. So I'm saying methodologically, in terms of coming up with a credible person, as Robbie Tulip just said then, who can kind of adjudicate or at least spell out the assumptions so everyone can see what's what and work out maybe this and maybe that and what if and all of that sort of thing, which is a big picture, not guessing and not whistling in the wind. It's actually writing things down so that you can see what the assumptions are and all and the references and all of that. I've spent about 40 hours of my life doing that already, and it's already written up and it's in your inbox and Stephen's inbox. So I think in the next fortnight, if anyone wants to take that further, it isn't going to be me. It could possibly be Robert Chris. He's probably qualified to do that if I dig out the papers and so forth. But, you know, I don't mind that we've had this conversation here this morning. It's been very good for raising things up at the level and allowing Stephen to again ask you about your assumptions, and you guys have just had an argy-bargy about stuff which I have already interrogated. So I'm not saying the word I there, I'm saying the word it needs to be written down and provided to people who can then, climate scientists can say, I agree with this or I don't agree with that, or let's do top-down modelling or bottom-up or whatever it is. But in our funding proposal, the one that's ready to go over to Shorosh, whoever wants to fund it, we're asking for, I think it's 0.7 million to do some bottom-up climate modelling led by Alan Gadian. So anyway, I appreciate that we've had this conversation, and I think it's been very fruitful and not a waste of our time. And I appreciate the courtesy in allowing me to make that comment.
Thanks, Rebecca. Herb?
Yeah, just a question. I know there have been some peer-reviewed papers on MCB, but is there an opportunity and a need for the creation of a paper that can be peer-reviewed, dealing with whatever aspects are still of some controversy or need explication? I mean, when you mention the IPCC, unless they change their policy, and I think they've begun to change their policy, as I think we know, they only look at peer-reviewed papers, and that'll be probably years from now anyway. So I just raised that question, whether, and that's not obviously in lieu of anything else that's being done, but in addition to.
Well, I've got wind of a paper being written, so I'll follow that one up. I was going to do that anyway. I'll take an action. I'll take an action on the paper. Sorry?
There are some good papers from Norway, from the Cecilia Labs in Norway. Everything that I write is rejected by the referees, but the Norwegian stuff is quite good.
Is there a need or an opportunity for a review paper that basically looks at the whole picture? Maybe something like that has already been produced. I have no idea.
I don't think there's been a review of doing a comparison between marine cloud brightening and stratospheric aerosol in a specific calculations. Gernot Wagner's probably done something because he does a geoengineering course.
There's a thing called GMIP, and there's over 100 papers on stratospheric aerosol, and I think there were 4 on marine cloud brightening.
On GeoMIP, and one of the problems is that the assumptions within those MCB papers are need to be can be challenged, and so the need to commission modelling that would reflect, I suppose, better assumptions about the deployment process for MCB is quite valuable. Now, I think we should have a bit of a chat about wildfires, that, as John suggested, and any.
Well,
any
I wanted to mention a proposal, which I think might have some attraction to the funders, because it's very simple. It has been suggested on one thread that the removal of SO2 from bunker oil in the ship fuel has led to heating because of the removal of the SO2 in the refinery process. So when they're out of port, they could revert to sulfur-rich fuel, and when they go back into port, they could. Now, what I'm suggesting is, you could monitor that from space and assess how much cooling the SO2 is, and you could perhaps even divide it into the cooling that's produced by cloud formation and the cooling that's produced by cloud brightening. So that would be a very good test of marine cloud brightening at low cost.
of SAI.
No, this is for the troposphere, and then you do exactly the same thing, or very corresponding thing in the stratosphere, which has already been suggested by Brown, von Hertzen, and Sean Fitzgerald independently. Sean came up with this at the workshop, Cambridge workshop, to fly planes that fly over or close to the pole, fly actually in the stratosphere, and if they had switched fuel tanks between low and high refined fuel, they switched to low and then back again. You could see this as a kind of I think Brian described it as a kind of Morse code in the sky. You'd actually see that from the satellite. So those are two really concrete things that could be done quite simply and straightforwardly, which would actually give us some estimates, some indications of roughly how much cooling we might do from the injection of a given amount of SO2, and in the case of Stephen, NaCl.
We have all the information we want about NaCl from Toomey's work. We don't need to repeat that.
So did Tuomi actually do the measurement and work out how much cloud brightening?
Yes, he did.
So
he flew over clouds and measured what was coming down from above and what was coming up from below, and then he flew into them and collected all the drops in the cloud and measured their sizes and the concentrations. Now, we haven't got that yet, I don't think, for stratospheric, but we should be able to get it. And we could probably get it if the next Pinatubo will probably be much better studied than the last one. We should be able to get all the information we want from that.
Okay, well, that was just a suggestion. I didn't know that Tuomi had done it.
Yeah,
perhaps we ought to do it again, just to make a point that
it was replicated by a chap called Ackerman. Andrew Ackerman repeated to me and said he got very good agreement with it. But these are physical instrument observations, not computer models. Toomey is really robust.
And that also, the Toomey effect indicates the need for submicron particles as well, and which of course is one of the big challenges for marine just working out how to produce submicron
Not
particles.
quite. The thing that supports the narrow spread is from the Cicero labs, where they did computer models of a range of different sizes of aerosol, and they found that the very small ones warmed instead of cooling, and the much bigger ones warmed. And they then pointed to a place where there was a gap between the Aitken mode and the accumulation mode, and this fits with a thing called the Greenfield gap as well. So that's why we're zooming in on a narrow spread, whereas Toomey was just measuring what was actually happening to the clouds themselves after they'd been nucleated. So we're trying to get in before Toomey.
Thanks,
Okay,
David.
Toomey was looking at real clouds, which had a rather wide spread of drop sizes, and what we're doing is relying on the Kohler equations about what size of drop is going to give you a nucleation. It'll end up growing a cloud drop that'll do doing the reflection. Okay, we also want to.
Can I ask you, when I do the calculation for Rebecca again, where do I assume you are? Which kind of latitudes are you covering? Are you doing this in the Arctic?
Guys, John,
are you
please,
doing your marine cloud brightening in the Arctic?
John,
Because
could
there's
you
been
please,
a lot of talk. No,
rather
I'm
than you
asking Stephen a sensible question.
You are, but can I say, rather than spending, I don't mind, we've got 3 minutes here, rather than you doing another sort of thing on a page, I do think it's a good idea for, I don't have time right at the moment, but someone to sit down and use what I did before, and you can build on that and specify it on, if you write words down, it's then more work for me or Robert, Chris or somebody with some scientific training to sit down and turn it back into a spreadsheet and a table. So how about if you write down whatever you want with questions, assumptions, and so forth. If you want to send it to Stephen or me or whoever you like, do it. But then someone's got to get it and turn it back into a table.
I need to know the area which Stephen.
Look, we've reached the end of our time, so
I'm just asking a very simple question to Stephen.
We'll
in a comparison,
by email conversation, I think.
Which area of the planet are you proposing to?
Any one that we think we can spray in any part of the planet that we think is the best at that time, and these places will change, but enormously, that by a factor of at least 10 in their susceptibility. But what we want is somewhere shut up! Let me finish, please. We will choose the places where we have a high solar input, where we have clean air, and where the air has been washed out by recent rain. Those are really the best places, and we can change our mind about where they are in the light of today's satellite observations. So the answer is we will go for the best places in the world, and we don't need to know now where they will be.
So
you can't change.
For refreezing the Arctic, what do you propose?
I can go up into the Arctic and look at the satellite images and decide where the vessels are best moved. They can move around very quickly when they're not spraying. But if we decide that we want to be further away from the Arctic, we will still get the cooling directed to there. So we might find that we want to be south of the Aleutians or near the Faroes. Wherever we do it, they end up with getting heat reduced in the Arctic. It's only if we're in a hurry to get it that we will be near the ice. If we want a really quick thing, which we might very well want to do in May and June.
Look, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining the call. We've reached the end of our time, and so really appreciate everyone coming along. And I'll circulate the recording and the chat, and see you again. Okay, goodbye.
Cheers.